Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about Blue Velvet. So the last review I did was on David Lynch. It was the first review I did after hearing about his death and being greatly saddened by this because I'm a massive David Lynch fan. And I decided to talk about a movie of his that I hadn't seen before, one that was known for being completely different from the rest of David Lynch's catalog, and one that was also known for being particularly comforting, which is exactly what I needed to make me feel better about David Lynch's passing. And it was the perfect movie for the time. I absolutely loved it. It's a movie that I wholeheartedly recommend for David Lynch fans and just movie fans in general to watch. So for anyone interested in that video, I'll put the link in the description below. But I mentioned in that video that my favorite of David Lynch's films is Blue Velvet. It was the first thing that I saw of David Lynch. It was before I watched Twin Peaks and any of his other films. It was the starting point. And it's a movie where its legacy has just grown since the film has come out back in 1986. It's a movie that, at the time it was released, it was very controversial, very divisive amongst critics. There were critics that loved the movie, that praised it for being a masterpiece. And then there were critics that did not like the movie, or felt that the movie was exploitive and too sexual and too violent and too dark. I mean, it's a movie that is about good versus evil, and the evil moments in this movie are very evil and very dark and very disturbing, but they're disturbing for a purpose. They're not disturbing or weird or strange for the sake of being disturbing, weird, or strange. And I feel like that's kind of like an unfair criticism that people who aren't fans of David Lynch say about his work. Like, David Lynch has been very straightforward about how honest his art is and how it comes from a sincere place, and that he has an understanding of it, but he doesn't want to explain it to people because he wants people to come up with their own interpretations.
I don't talk about things like that. You see the film and you feel and think your way through, just like any other film, and you come up with conclusions. It's beautiful to go into a new world, and that's what cinema gives us a chance to do.
And Blue Velvet is often named as probably being one of the best starting points for getting into David Lynch, because while the movie certainly has surreal and dark, abstract moments in it, the movie is fairly simple from a storytelling perspective. The film revolves around a young man who is home from college due to his father having a medical issue. I think we see him at the beginning of this movie watering his plants in a beautiful, pristine 1950s suburban neighborhood. And as I don't know if it's a stroke or an aneurysm, or the movie doesn't really say, we see the camera pan down into the grass, and underneath we see these scuzzy bugs fighting with each other. And that's the movie right off the bat tells you what it's really going to be about just from its visuals, which is, here's a beautiful neighborhood that represents the American dream and, and just good, wholesome American values, the white picket fence, and then underneath it, there is a dark underbelly that is not usually seen, but it is there. And that's kind of what the whole movie is about, thematically speaking. So Jeffrey Beaumont, while he's home from college, ends up discovering a severed ear in a field. And he's very intrigued by this. So he takes the ear, goes to a police station, talks to the detective there, gives him the ear, and then the detective's daughter, played by Laura Dern, who is interested in Jeffrey, they end up talking, and she ends up telling him that, this might be related to a lounge singer. And then this kind of sets Jeffrey on the trail to wanting to get involved in this mystery. And rewatching this movie, because I've seen this movie, I think this is maybe my 5th or 6th time watching this movie. I've seen this movie quite a bit. One thing that I noticed this time around is that the movie really takes its time to build up the story. It starts off as a slow burn, and then basically once the introduction of Frank Booth comes in, it is like a nightmare Lynchian roller coaster until we get to the finish line. But the movie starts off, slow. We're introducing Jeffrey. We're introducing this world. We're showing you some weird visual stuff that David Lynch is known for. And as we end up following Jeffrey on this path, we then discover that this woman by the name of Dorothy Valance, played by Isabella Rossellini, she is being held against her will as a sex slave, more or less, to an evil man named Frank Booth, who is a gangster, drug dealer, and, you know, all sorts of evil shit. He is holding her husband and son captive so that she can do things for him. And Jeffrey ends up making it his mission to try to help Dorothy. That's the story on the surface. Underneath it, there's a lot of different things going on thematically. There's a lot of subtext in this movie. And that's why I end up revisiting this movie as much as I do. This is not a feel-good movie by any means. And it's a movie that I am somewhat hesitant to recommend to people who may not be familiar with David Lynch's work, because it is very dark. It's very abrasive with its style. It's very uncomfortable. But if you are a fan of classic noir films, if you're a fan of challenging movies with deep subject matters, this is a movie that has a lot to offer in that regard. But it is why I say, if you want to get into David Lynch's work, I recommend starting with the first season, only 8 episodes, of Twin Peaks, because that kind of represents everything that David Lynch is exploring in this movie, but because it was made for TV, it's a little bit more palatable than this film is. So what's the subtext underneath this movie, watching it this time around, is one of the big themes is that of sexual abuse. That really stood out to me. It's one that always stands out to me every time I rewatch it. The psychological nature of sexual abuse. Frank Booth, played by Dennis Hopper, which is one of the best villainous performances ever, certainly one of the most unforgettable. It's Dennis Hopper's best performance by far. It's incredible, it's intimidating, it's nerve-wracking, it's kind of funny. There's a weird, macabre sense of humor in this movie.
What kind of beer do you like? Heineken. Heineken? Fuck that shit! Pabst Blue Ribbon!
It's so strange, but he is one of the most fascinating characters maybe ever, because David Lynch doesn't really give you a whole lot of information about him. All you know is that he's psychotic. He's inhaling a drug that apparently was supposed to be helium originally. He was supposed to have a high-pitched voice. Dennis Hopper actually talked about this in an interview, which I found to be very interesting.
As a matter of fact, David Lynch, who never was an alcoholic or a drug addict, who wrote it, he wrote the thing as helium that I was snorting. So, like, you know, I went to him and I said, David, he had helium there. Helium doesn't make you crazy and derange your senses. It just makes you sound like Daffy Duck. And I said, David, I'm listening to my voice. That's all I hear. I said, let me think of it like an amyl nitrate or a nitric oxide or something that deranged my senses. So he said, great, and he encouraged that. But, like, you know, and only till recently did I think, wouldn't it have been interesting, the way he wrote it, how scary Frank Booth would have been if he was a guy who just became Daffy Duck and said all those lines, that kind of sinister, just a voice. Mm-hmm. What a bizarre guy that is.
He seems to have some sort of sexual complex revolving around a relationship with his mother. This is something that is not explicitly said in the movie, but as we see in the very infamous and disturbing scene where Jeffrey's hiding in the closet and is witnessing all the stuff happening to Dorothy, we see that he has a weird mommy type of complex. And it's used in a disturbing, abusive, sexual manner. And then we also see how that affects Dorothy. So Jeffrey, you know, once he gets caught by Dorothy by being in her closet, after the whole ordeal with Frank ends, he goes out, he tries to comfort her, and she is interested in Jeffrey, but she also wants Jeffrey to hurt her some more in a sexual fashion, because the sexual abuse that she's experiencing is like destroying her ability to have a healthy relationship with somebody. It's really, really fascinating and disturbing, but it's explored in a way that is very intriguing and, surprisingly poignant. Frank Booth is a character where you kind of have to fill in the blanks yourself. And that's one of my favorite things about David Lynch's filmography in general, is that he loves showing the audience, but not telling them. And he loves people coming up with their own interpretations of his movies. And with Blue Velvet, it's a little bit easier because I said the story is more linear, it's easier to follow, and, you know, he gives you a lot of clues to kind of put the pieces together in terms of what the movie is saying, all the subtext in the film. But when you go to his more abstract movies like Eraserhead or Mulholland Drive, then it becomes a little bit more challenging, but he still gives you all the information to come up with your own theories, more or less. One of the other things that I really noticed about Blue Velvet was that it is his most important movie. It's his most important movie in terms of his direction, because this movie would kind of be the blueprint for Twin Peaks and then his other works like Mulholland Drive and throughout the rest of his career. His love for noir filmmaking, that's Blue Velvet really establishes that. This is a movie that is often classified as a neo-noir. It's very Hitchcock. Which David Lynch is a huge Hitchcock fan. His favorite Hitchcock movie is Rear Window. Voyeurism is a big kind of element in this movie, with Jeffrey spying on Dorothy and getting involved in this dark world that he isn't really supposed to. So all of those elements, which would be kind of later explored in Twin Peaks and his other works as well. But the main element is the relationship between good and evil, which is also very prevalent in his other works later on. And for as dark and as disturbing as this movie gets, and it gets very uncomfortable, there are moments of lightness, there are moments of hope and optimism. And I think one of the things that David Lynch gets criticized a lot for is his movies being very nihilistic, right? You know, there's a lot of hopelessness in his movies, there's a lot of despair, there's a lot of torment in his movies. But David Lynch is a very optimistic, uplifting guy. I saw a really interesting video on YouTube of him talking about the label that artists often get is being dark and disturbed, and that art has to come from this tormented place, and he is very much against that.
You can understand conflict, but you don't have to suffer in it. And you can get ideas from it. The whole world, most things just reflect the world. They just reflect the world. But I say, if you're really and truly depressed, you can't even get out of bed. You can't create.
While this movie is very dark and challenging, there are moments of hope and lightness, and we see that in kind of the subplot with Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern. There's a relationship developing between these two characters while Jeffrey's kind of going down this rabbit hole that is meant to represent the hope and goodness and love, and this is the stuff that combats the dark and the evil aspects of this movie. And the movie ends with our characters getting out of this horrific situation. You know, Jeffrey ends up killing Frank, and the Robins come. There's a scene earlier in the movie where Laura Dern talks about how she had a dream ever since she met Jeffrey about the Robins representing love and light, and the Robins eventually come and they'll help get rid of all this darkness. And the movie ends and we see a robin with a disgusting beetle or insect in its mouth. And they comment on that, and they're like, "Oh, that's kind of strange." And that image right there represents what this movie is all about: the relationship between good or evil. You can't have one without the other, and it's a lifelong, eternal battle between good and evil. And the last shot really resonated with me. And, you know, Dorothy gets to have her son back, and she's hugging him, and there's a genuine smile and hope and happiness on her face. But then that kind of fades away to a sadness, because she has wounds that will eventually heal, but the scars will always remain. And so trauma is another big factor in David Lynch's work, and he explores that in pretty much all of his other works after Blue Velvet. And that's why I think Blue Velvet is his most important movie. It's kind of the foundation for his career going forward. It's certainly the foundation for Twin Peaks, not just because, you know, Kyle MacLachlan is in this movie, but just the themes that he explores in this movie would also very much be explored in Twin Peaks. Themes of sexual abuse, themes of trauma, themes of good versus evil, light versus dark. It all really starts with Blue Velvet. It is a masterpiece, Blue Velvet. It is genuinely an entertaining movie that has moments of humor, that has moments of light and romance and love and hope, but it also has dark, scuzzy, uncomfortable, classic Lynchian surreal stuff to it, and there will never be another movie like it. Just like there will never be another filmmaker like David Lynch, and there will never be a catalog of movies that he has. It just won't happen. So, you know, he's a one of a kind. Rest in peace. So anyway, guys, that's my thoughts on this movie. I absolutely love Blue Velvet, but I want to hear from you guys. What are your thoughts on this film? Do you love it? Do you hate it? What are your favorite David Lynch movies? Put them in the comments below, and as always, thank you guys for watching.